Hello and welcome to the Grizzled Warmaster, and this is take 2 of the new Lumineth Realms Warscrolls, Huracan, and the rest. I did try and record this earlier and get it out to you earlier in the week, but my video and audio kind of really messed up, kind of froze up on me, so I had to go back to this presentation format. So let's go ahead and go through the remaining Warscrolls from the new Lumineth release. And we'll go ahead and start off, not with the War Scroll per se, but the Shrine Lumineth. One, super cool model. I can't wait to get my hands on it. And we had pretty much already heard what this one would do. It allows, if there is a person manning it, I think they call it a Shrine Guardian, if they're up there, they could use a command point for free. And the other thing they get is, I believe it's a reroll casting rolls. The first casting roll for a unit within 12 inches, or 24 if there's a guardian in the manning the shrine. So not bad. Maybe not good enough to leave somebody in the shrine and leave them behind the rest of the army. Unless you're playing more of a static force where you just kind of want to group up on your side, do as much damage, and then move on from there. So it's good. I mean, there's no reason not to put it on the table. And I think it hands out some decent bonuses, especially if you want to put a Guardian in there, at least in the first round or two, and put a unit of Sentinels there so that you can just give them Volley Fire for free. So that's always a nice little bit. So let's move on to then our I'm going to do the non-Huracan stuff first. So we'll start with the Venari Blade Lords. These guys have a pretty decent stat line here. 6-inch move like most of the elves. 2 wounds. A 4-up save and a 7 bravery. And remember, with the Ether Quartz, they can make that a 3-up save. So that's pretty nice. 3-up save, 4-up save with 2 wounds will make. And they are Venari, so they'll get Shining Company. So if you want to keep them grouped up, you will be able to be fairly tanky. They'll be -1 to hit. If you're being hit by weapons that don't have rend, they've got a 50-50 chance of stopping it, maybe even a 2/3 chance of stopping it if you want to use an Ether Quartz. 2 wounds to go through. I mean, still only 10 wounds for the unit as you buy them in 5s, but still not bad. They also have the Vanishimore banners, which give them a 4-up to ignore the effects of spells and endless spells on this unit. And that is, it does not have the weird wording that the R of Selenar had, which was if it were cast by an enemy wizard, meaning the spell in the bottle, sometimes, depending on how you interpreted that, would not be affected by that aura, but it would be by these banners. So, and I'm going to look up the Aura of Selenar real quick to see if they changed the wording on that. I hadn't thought about looking that up before, but let's see. And I guess it's the Seeing Stone of Selenar. Each time a friendly unit is within range of the R of Selenar, his ability is affected by an endless spell or a spell cast by an enemy wizard. On a 4-up, they ignore it. So, again, things that aren't cast by an enemy wizard, they would not be able to ignore. So, this is definitely a difference there. But let's go ahead and dive into what these guys can do. Should point out that they are Guardians. They can take wounds for a Scenari, so that's pretty cool. If you've got a build where the Scenari are really fundamental, especially if you're doing a non-techless and you have a Scenari as your general, especially if you're going to do a Cathalar on a Balewind Vortex, you want to just park 5 of these guys next to him to give that Cathalar 10 extra wounds. That's not a bad use of 120 points to keep a general with a large 5-up feel no pain aura up. That's, hey, there's worse uses for these guys in my opinion. But let's go ahead and look at their Sun Metal Great Blades. They have 2 abilities with this, and we've already seen these on the Warhammer community site, but they get to pick, do they want a perfect strike or a flurry of blows, depending on if they're fighting one unit or a big massive unit, or a small elite unit. If they do the perfect strike, they automatically hit, wound on a 2+, with -2 rend and 1 damage. So this is pretty much assured 5, maybe 6 points of damage done. Because the Seneschal, the Blade Lord Seneschal here, can take a Sun Metal Great Blade or the Sun Metal Dual Blades. There's no reason to take those dual blades. You want the Great Blade every time, in my opinion. You're going to get 2 attacks with that perfect strike, or however many people are within 2 inches. The flurry of blow is pick a model, count up the number of models within 2 inches, and that's how many attacks that model gets. So, against 25mm races, they're going to be pretty big. So if you can line that Seneschal up next to 6 guys, he gets 6 attacks for the flurry of blows, +1 because he's the Seneschal. So you'll get an extra 1 for that. So it's always good to just do him as a Great Blade. I know it looks thematically cool to give him the dual blades, but you want him wielding the Great Blade. The flurry of blows is not quite what I would hope for. You could get lots of attacks, but 3s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage. Lots of attacks that aren't going to do lots of work. So let's say you do run into the most common unit of 25mm bases that you're likely to run into in the game, and that is Mortek Guard. If you run into a unit of 20 Mortek Guard, it is very possible you could get a good 26 to 30 hits or attacks with these guys. So let's say it's 26. Well, you're out of the gate. You're going to hit with approximately 16 to 18 of them. We'll say 17 of them. Then you're going to wound with approximately 12 of those with no rend. Now, if they've used Shield Wall, only 6 will get through. Then they get to reroll. 3 are likely to get through. So you're going to do 3, maybe 2 damage if they get a Deathless Warriors save in there. So you're not going to get lots of damage with the flurry of blows. It sounds really great, but it could be better if you decide to use your Aether Quartz to hit on 2s. Now those 26 attacks are even better, hitting more like 21 to 22 times, and then doing 14 wounds. So it can get a lot better. Obviously, if I were going up against Mortek Guard, I would just do the perfect strike and make sure I was getting through. But other smaller units, even things on 32mm bases, you might get a good number of attacks. Here's the problem. There are so many good units with the Lumineth. You have to build your force specifically to use these guys for, in my opinion, one of 2 things. One, to protect a particularly important Venari model. 2, you need battle line. You obviously are going to have a Venari in your army. I can't imagine a Lumineth army without at least 1 Venari. These guys are 1 unit of Blade Lords is a battle line per Venari you have in your army. So you could use it to fill out battle line. If you didn't want to take Wardens, you wanted somebody a little more tanky and offensive, or you wanted to build a big block of these guys and use the new Realm of Wind spell to teleport them in the enemy's face and try and assassinate important units right away, which I don't think is necessarily a bad plan, especially if you're going to take the chronomatic cogs, throw these guys out 9 inches away from the enemy, give them a +2 to their charge, line them up so that one of the fast-moving heroes is close to them so they can re-roll, and then you've got 2 chances at a 7-inch charge. 15 of these guys with Perfect Strike can pretty much guarantee anything with 12 wounds or less is dead. Well, I shouldn't say that because piling around stuff, but you could make an ironclad unable to fly high anymore. There's a lot you could do with a big block of these guys if you were willing to go all in on the Blade Lords. I'm not sure that that's the most competitive way to play a Lumineth army, but it is an option. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to our next unit, which is the Starshard Ballista. Again, cheap, 100 points. That's not bad. 6-inch move, 5 wounds, 6 bravery, 5+ save. I'm not happy with. That's a little light for a war machine. They do not, despite being Venari, they don't have -1 to be hit. So that's kind of a bummer. So these guys are okay, but squishy. And realistically, they will always have a 6-up. Because of their warding lanterns, they're always going to have a 6-up to ignore wounds or mortal wounds. The warding lancers also give them +1 attack if they don't move. So they could get 3 attacks. But at 3s and 3s, that's not great. That means that statistically, you're only likely to hit with 1. Hit and wound with 1. Occasionally, I think it works out to if you get 3 attacks, 2 will hit, and then 1 point something of them will wound. So now you do get, if the enemy you're targeting is within 24 inches and you have a hero that's within 24, you have a unit that's within 24 inches of a friendly hero, and the ballista is within 24 inches of the hero, then the ballista, even if it's not within 24 inches, it can be at its full 30, gets the +1 to hit for attack rolls. So that then could give them 2-up to hit, making it more likely that all 3 attacks get through than maybe 2 will actually wound. So, okay. -2 Ren's good. I like that on war machines. D3 damage, okay. I wish there were a little more shenanigans with the damage. And realistically, the reason you would, I don't want to say the only reason you would take them. If you're on the fence, you're like, I kind of want these guys, but I'm not sure. The once per battle blinding bolt might tip the scales for you. Basically, all you have to do, if a unit is hit by an attack made by this unit in the face, they don't have to be wounded. They are dazzled for the turn. For just this turn, so your turn so you would need somebody being in melee combat with them. You'll subtract 1 from hit rolls for that unit. It's dazzled. The unit cannot be dazzled more than once per turn, and that's a once per battle thing. So you could use these guys to support like an Alpha Strike unit, where you're like, I'm going to send people in. I'm going to get them right in there, through teleport shenanigans, or it's a lore seeker, or something like that, or it's a Huracan unit that you just get right up in the enemy's face, and you're like, I want to make sure that unit has a good chance of surviving. I'm going to hit them with a blinding bolt and make them -1 to hit. That could be a good use for this. But that 5+ save on these guys means I will find it hard to include these guys in a competitive list. Sometimes I might have 100 points laying around willing to spend on it, but there are much better options. I mean, if you can afford the difference in points, a unit of Sentinels is better. A unit of Blade Lords is better. A unit of Wardens is better. A unit of, they're not the same points, but a unit of Wind Riders is better. A lot of units are better than the Starshard Ballista, unfortunately. If this had 1 more attack base, or this was a 4-up save, just that slight change, I would be more likely to spend 100 points on it. But, all right. I mean, just... Sorry, I'm going to keep harping on this. Think about this in comparison to the Stormcast Ballistas. Those Ballistas do have a 4-up armor save, have 6 wounds, I believe. 6 or 7, I can't remember. They're only 10 points more. They get more attacks, I believe. It's 2 or 3. I think it's 3. No, it's 4. Oh, it depends on which. It's 4 if they're at long range, 2 if they're, or 2 at long range, 4 at short range. But those then multiply. So yes, it's 3s and 3s to hit with two attacks. But if one of those gets through, or one of those hits, or both of them hit, it becomes a D6 hits each. So those, for 10 more points, they are by far way better. They don't have the built-in 6-up, feel no pain. They don't have the way to get the +1, but so what? They can. Those don't make the difference in the point value difference and effectiveness difference, in my opinion. But let's go ahead and stop beating a dead horse and move on to the next, the Huracan Wind Mage, which we already kind of talked about. I'm only including him here because he affects all the Huracan units. So you'll want to really consider how you want to fit this guy in your army, or if you are going to. 16 inches with fly, 5 wounds, 5-up save, so he's just as squishy as most heroes. He is, however, cheaper than a Cathalar. I mean, arguably less useful than the Cathalar, but still, he's got lots going for him. He's got this little fan of redirection, which is kind of just a little silly little bonus. I hope that doesn't factor into his point values. You add 1 to save rolls versus missile weapons, which is cool to prevent being assassinated. So if you've got him near units when he's being shot at, he'll actually be -1 to hit and +1 to save. So that is pretty cool. And then he can redirect it if the unit attacking him is only within 9 inches. Might happen, but unlikely. He does his wind leap. Wind chargers that start their move wholly within 6 inches, so pretty limiting. When it makes that move, the unit moves characteristic gets 16 instead of 14, and it can fly. So, and these guys are fast enough to keep up with those wind chargers if for some reason you wanted to keep that ability going. So, or you could just set them up next to them in the beginning to really get them moving. Their Wind Blast Vortex is okay. It's not great. It's a little different than an Arcane Bolt. It's not guaranteed, but it is going to be D3 instead of 1, regardless of the casting value. It is only 9 inches instead of 18. So you're rarely going to cast this spell anyways. You take him for the wind lore. You're going to give him the healing spell or the make missile shots better, or you're going to give him the teleport spell. Those are really the only reasons to take that guy. Or I shouldn't say, the only spells you're going to cast with this guy. The other thing you're going to want this guy around for is how he affects Severith and the other wind spirits. Where if they start their hero phase within 12 inches of him, they heal D3 wounds. So that's pretty cool. And I'm glad I like what they did with the Alarith, but I'm glad they did something different. All right, let's jump into the last 2 Huracan units. Huracan Wind Chargers. These guys move 14, have 2 wounds, 5-up save with 7 bravery. Unfortunately, that 5-up save is not great. They have 2 modes of attack. Their Wind Charger Bow, which can be fired as a missile weapon, 12 inches, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, 1 damage. Or they can be in melee combat where they still use their bow, which gets -2 rend, funny enough, because I believe the idea is they are still shooting you. They're just shooting you at point blank range now. And their mount has a 1-inch attack, 2 attacks, 3s, 4s, no rend, 1 damage. These guys really don't want to be tied up in melee combat unless they're doing their special Huracan charge where they get to charge in, pile in 6 inches with fly. They don't have to go towards the nearest unit. Maybe they're working together with Severiths so that they can attack from 3 inches, but the enemy isn't able to pile in as much because of Severith. That's possible. So those are cool. I like all that. I don't like the 12-inch range. I got to be honest. I know they have a 26-inch 26-inch threat range. But when you consider, I guess 22 if they're near a Wind Mage, but when you consider that the Sentinels have a 36-inch range, threat range, with the ability to cause mortal wounds, these guys start to not look as good, especially at a 130-point price tag. Now their Seneschal does get an extra attack with their bow, which would apply to both melee and range, so that's pretty good. They get to reroll battle shocks. You ignore cover, so their cover modifiers to save rolls, so that's good. Along with that 1 rend, that will help. And then when they're moving, they ignore terrain as if they could fly. So the real power from these guys comes from that Huracan allegiance ability, which is they don't have to pile in to the closest model. So you could use these guys to go and assassinate units that you really need to take out that are behind a screen, as long as they're close enough to the screen for their ability to help. So that is a possibility. Again, they have a large threat range. They can run around the table and claim objectives, so that they're good in that sense. So I really haven't formed a solid opinion on whether I think these guys could just really be game changers or not. You're going to have to see people test them out. There's nothing obvious about them where it's like, oh yeah, if you do this and then this, you're really going to screw over an enemy, blah, blah, blah. That just doesn't jump out, especially against those armies that are top of the list, top of the meta. Because most of the things you could do with these guys, like run up in front of, you could speed a hitch these guys, run them up and screen right in front of your enemy, keeping them trapped in their deployment zone. Well, if they're playing, say, Seraphon, they just teleport past you and then hit you with the stuff that was going to take a little while to get into range anyways. Or if they're Caradron Overlords, they're backfield guys who are going to hold objectives, like their Arcanaut companies who aren't riding in boats, might get caught out by these guys. You might be able to, really trash an Arcanaut company with them, but the boats are just going to pop past them and say, man, I'm out of here. Even other Lumineth armies will be able to largely mitigate anything these guys can do. So I'm really not sure what these guys' place in an army. There's got to be something cool. They've just got so many good rules stacked around them and a lot of heroes and support that could make them very good. So I don't want to count these guys out yet. If, for example, you could use the Lore of Wind spell that's escaping my mind right now, the one that can either give them +1 to hit with their bows or increase the range by 6 inches. You could give their Wind Charger bows 18-inch range, which might make them a little more effective at hitting things further back in the enemy lines than you want. The problem with this is the problem with GW that they've had for a very long time. Movement is significant in this game. It is very powerful, but they have a tendency to overprice movement. So these guys have if they did not have a 14 move, if they had let's say an 8-inch move, with the weapons they are equipped with and the abilities they have otherwise, this is a 90, maybe 100 point unit max. But they give them a 30 point boost because they've got 6 more inches of movement. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll have to test them out on the tabletop and see. They look cool, and I think there's something there. I'm just not sure what it is. All right. Now, I believe the runner-up, the second most impressive unit in the new release is Severith, Lord of the Seventh Wind. And specifically Severith, not the other Spirit of the Wind. At 300 points, he is pricey, but you get a lot for that. You get 24 inches of movement, which is insanely good. Plus 12 inches more, which we'll get to in a minute. He's got 10 wounds. He is not a monster, so he can benefit from Lookout Sir. So that is one useful bit from the Huracan. Wind Chargers is keep a unit of 5 of those close to Severith. People are -1 to hit him now. He's got a 10 bravery, and I don't like that 5-up save, but I understand. That's kind of been these guys are lightly armored and fast, so I can't fault that too much. His bow, Inathrai, the Howling Death, is super impressive. It starts off with an 18-inch range, which he actually has an effective threat range of 42 inches or more if you cast Speed of Hish on him. So that bow can hit just about anything anywhere on the table. It's got 4 attacks, 2s to hit, 3s to wound, -3 Ren, D3 damage. I wish there were something more in the Lumineth army that allowed you to pump up that to wound roll, but the fact of the matter is you could get it to where he is highly likely to hit with all 4 attacks, and then likely 3 of them are going to get through and wound. There are very few things that can stand up to -3 rend, so you are probably doing 3d3 damage to somebody. Add to that, if you want to, we're going to skip by into the Gale, we'll get there in a minute. If you charge, then every enemy unit within 3 inches you roll a die for, and on a 3-up they take a mortal wound, and subtract 1 from hit rolls for that unit until the next combat phase. So a unit cannot be affected by this ability more than once per phase, but if you are going all in with Severith charging, it might be worth taking the Ballista to hit that enemy again, with the Ballista giving them -2 to hit Severith. When you add that to the fact that he has Into the Gale, which not only gives you a 5-up to ignore wounds or mortal wounds, also means that any model within 3 inches of him subtracts 2 from the distance that they can pile in to a minimum of 1. So you're going to be able to, and again, he benefits from the Huracan ability to, when he charges, doesn't have to pile in towards the nearest unit. So he could pull back to just within 3 inches. All of his melee attacks are 3 inches long. Check it out. 3 inches. So he can go in, cause some mortal wounds, kind of back off so that very few enemy models can get to him, and that those that are coming in that can manage to get attacks to him, -1. If you got a Ballista, maybe -2 to hit. Very good. Makes him surprisingly tanky with all of that going on. And he can use Ether Quartz, so he could always, well, he's got 2s to hit with most of his stuff, so you're likely to only ever use it to improve his armor, so he can have a 4-up armor from time to time. In melee, if you were to go that direction, he has 3-inch range on both of his weapons, like I said. 2 attacks with his bow, 2s to hit, 3s to wound, -2 rend, D3 damage. Again, very good. Plus, he's got his swirling shards, D3 attacks, 3s and 3s, -1 damage. You hope to get a point of through from that. But mainly, you're counting on, I'm going to get some mortal wounds, I'm going to shoot him, I'm going to do some mortal wounds on the charge, then maybe get a hit through with Howling Death to do another D3 damage. And you're also going to hope you fly over them with this Searing Desert Winds. After this model makes a normal move, including if it moves at the end of the shooting phase, which we'll talk about here in a second, pick one enemy unit that has any models that are passed over by this model. Roll a dice on a 3-up, D3 mortal wounds. Now, it is only one enemy unit, and it's a 3-up, so it's not quite as reliable as I would hope, but it's still pretty cool. It's yet one more way to get in some mortal wounds from this guy. And like I just mentioned there, after he moves, he can then shoot, and then at the end of the shooting, this model may make a normal 12-inch move, but cannot run. It can retreat, however. So if it were in combat the turn before, and you did not want to, say your enemy charged you, you survive that combat. You don't want to retreat out of combat, so you wait, you take your shooting phase, then you can move 12 inches out of combat. In addition, the model can retreat and still charge later in the same turn. So you can leave that unit that you've just shot, and you can fly over it 12 inches, hopefully doing D3 mortal wounds to it, and then charge a totally different unit. This guy is amazing. Now, most of this stuff that we just talked about, the other wind spirits can do, and I'm actually going to check. There are 2 abilities that Severith gets that they don't, and that is they don't get Scour, which we haven't talked about, and they don't get the Searing Desert Winds, so the extra D3 mortal wounds when they fly over them. They'd get all of the other ones. They have the same number of attacks. All they lose is 1 rend off the bow in the shooting phase. They lose the Searing Desert Winds, which is the fly over mortal wounds, and they lose Scour, which is his last ability, which is at the start of the charge phase, you can pick one faction terrain feature that is within 1 inch of this model. If you do so, this model cannot charge in that phase, but you can roll a dice. On a 2+, the scenery rules on that terrain features Warscroll cannot be used for the rest of the battle. And he can easily get to where most people will set up their faction terrain. So turn 1, you could fly up next to the Bone Reapers, Bone Tithe Nexus, and go, I'm not going to charge. I'm on a 2-up. You can't use any of the curses from that Bone Tithe Nexus for the rest of the game. That is pretty amazing. Now, there are a lot of factions that don't have terrain that they're, or terrain that you're going to want to bother to go out of your way to take away their abilities, but it is still a cool ability. Despite all that, Severith is amazing. But for 50 points less, losing that Scour and the Searing Desert Wind and 1 rend on the bow, the other wind spirits are a good buy as well, especially if you're really starved for points. In an army with Techless already taking up 660 points, you might not be able to afford to spend 300 on Severith, so you might want to go for it. The other wind spirit, but I would definitely take one of these wind spirits in any army I could. But let's go ahead, and this was the last unit we were going to talk about, but I want to do a kind of a kind of a wrap up of all of the things we've added here. And this is now a full army, which I said when I did the first review of the book, that it felt like an incomplete army. It didn't feel, I know it had as many models as a lot of the new armies did. It had a number of different units that a lot of the new, like Flesh Eater courts or the dwarves, not Caradron. Well, even Caradron Overlords don't have it until recently. They don't. A lot of the new armies that have been made that didn't come from fantasy don't have lots of Warscrolls, but they still feel like cohesive armies. And I didn't feel that way about the Lumineth prior to this release. Now I feel like they are a complete army, hits all of the bases, but they're going to be very difficult to build for competitive play, because you're going to want to include a lot of these cool things, but you're going to run into points barriers really quick. You're going to run into some issues with, if you want to play an army with techless in it, you're already vastly limiting yourself in the points available to spend. Additionally, this is an army that really wants to be as few drops as possible. And their Warscrolls don't really, or Warscrolls, their battalions don't really lend themselves to that unless you're very focused. And really, the Arlon battalion is the only one you're going to probably go with that is, I'm going to make sure I have as few drops as possible. Now, if you're going without techless in your army, you could afford to have a few more drops, and it won't be as big a deal if your enemy gets to alpha strike you and kind of snipe out certain elements of your army. There'll be a lot more going on. They are still very endurant. It is just techless that's that disappointingly a very fragile piece in turn 1 before he gets to go. Once you get to go and he can put up the protection of techless, he becomes a little more endurant, but still not super. So that is a weak link in its 660 points that can be fairly confidently shot off the board by some of the top meta armies. So that's something you really have to be careful with. It's unfortunately that's one of the things they're going to have to do with a new edition of the game, is deal with stuff like that. Yes, he is a extraordinarily potent model that's got a lot going for him, but something that expensive should not be that easy to remove. So you're seeing like Severith, if he was your main centerpiece, well, it's would be pretty easy to probably target him with ranged attacks and things like that, or to get those kind of alpha strikes on him. But he has a built-in 5-up to ignore wounds and mortal wounds. He can benefit from Lookout Sir, which techless cannot. So he's -1 to hit. He can make himself a 4-up save, and he's got a 5-up to ignore wounds and mortal wounds. So he's a little safer, is what I'm getting at. So, anyways, I could go on and on tactics-wise and building armies and what I think about Lumineth. I'm looking forward to playing them. It is going to be interesting trying to suss out what is the most effective competitive way to play them. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you would, please share with a friend. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.